event of this series. My name is Dr. Alexandra Opra. I'm a core faculty member in the Politics, Philosophy, and Economics program. I'm just going to tell you a couple of things about our program, and then I'm going to introduce our very popular speaker today and let him take over. For those of you who are here, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the Politics, Philosophy, and Economics program. If this is your first time wandering in because of the free pizza or the really cool speaker, you should know that there are opportunities like this almost every week or every other week during the semester. We offer courses in the Gateway to Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. That's the first course you take in the minor. And there are lots of faculty members in the room that teach this course. We also offer you a selection of 3 courses in politics and philosophy and economics to get you started in the tools of game theory, public choice and social choice, and the theories of political philosophy and distributive justice. And then we let you loose in a capstone course to design a capstone project of your choice, research it under supervision of some of our faculty. Can I get some of our faculty members to get up just so that your students can see? We have Daniel Muniz in the back, Jeff McCord, we have Sardar, Luke Bowman, and Lucy Schwartz, and I think, who did I? Yeah, Doug McKenna, thank you very much. And myself. So if you want to know more about our courses and the kinds of things being offered, you are welcome to ask any of our faculty members. We also offer reading groups, both for current undergraduates and for alumni. And this semester, one of our reading groups was on the book Grandstanding by Professor Warmke. If you're interested in these sorts of reading groups, they meet once a week over a delicious food and discuss chapters from a book over the course of a semester. So I hope you'll be interested in getting in touch and learning more about our PPE program and our courses. It is my absolute pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker. This is Professor Brandon Warmke, who's an associate professor of philosophy at Bowling Green University. He is well known for the book Grandstanding, The Use and Abuse of Moral Talk, that came out in 2020, that has been the subject of 2 reading groups and multiple courses at UNC already, as well as subject to national attention, covered by the Huffington Post, the New York Times, the Atlantic, Scientific American, Forbes, Vox, and The Guardian. It's also being translated in a range of languages, including Portuguese and most recently Korean. He has also edited a volume on forgiveness and its moral dimensions, and has written on the topic of forgiveness broadly, and is currently in the process of writing a book with his co-author Justin Tosi on the merits of minding your own business. So without further ado, let me welcome Professor Warmke to give his talk, Don't Block the Exits. And in keeping with that talk, please don't block the fire exits.
Thank you so much. I'm floored. Get it? There are so many of you here. It's really flattering. In fact, I'd like to take a photo if you don't mind, so I can brag about your PPE program. Is that okay? Can I do that? Right. 1, 2, 3. You can wave. You want to hoot and holler or wave? Or something? 1, 2, 3, go! My apologies to those on the wings. I don't. Sorry. That's the only boo I'll get. Okay, go ahead. Okay, I'm sorry. You better look at my bad side. I want to thank UNC PPE for having me out, especially Professor Sanford Thank you so much. And Professor O'Farrell. Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a big supporter of PPE programs. I teach in one myself. I think that virtually all of our social and political problems are extremely complex. And to the extent that you get a handle on these problems at all, we have to use interdisciplinary tools. I hope what I have to say tonight is in that spirit. What I want to talk about tonight is how we should treat people who change their minds about moral and political matters. Now, some of us here may have never changed our minds about moral and political matters, let alone said so publicly. So this talk may not be for you. Even so, you may be able to help me improve this paper. It's a paper that Justin Tosi and I are working on. And it is, as a lot of philosophers often say, gestural. So it's I'm going to gesture at some ideas. John Stuart Mill famously argued in On Liberty that freedom could be threatened not only by the state, but by society in general. Mill was especially concerned about the effects of social coercion on free expression. Even if the state is legally constrained from interfering with individual expression, that is little consolation to those of us who are fired from our jobs or ostracized by our communities for expressing our beliefs. And I share Mill's concerns, which is sadly becoming only more pressing. According to one recent survey, 62% of Americans said that they are afraid to share some of their beliefs because of the current political climate. As you might imagine, this fear is more common among conservatives, but a majority of liberals and moderates also report sharing. 2/3 of Latino Americans and nearly half of African Americans are afraid to share their political views. So are 65% of men and 59% of women. 60% of people with incomes over $100,000 a year and 58% of people with incomes less than $20,000 a year are afraid to share their views. 71% of the religious and 56% of the non-religious all agree that the political climate prevents them from expressing their true beliefs. Evidently, our purportedly liberal society has not embraced Mill's warnings about social coercion. Americans enjoy First Amendment protection, broad First Amendment protection against state interference with free expression. But yet most of us feel highly vulnerable to interference from everyone else. Now, I want to ask, what would a society look like that more closely realized Mill's vision for a free liberal order? That kind of society, I think, would have very different social norms about matters of free expression than we currently have. Some of these more liberal norms are easy to imagine. For instance, a truly liberal society would have a norm against trying to get someone fired just because you disagree with their political views. But other norms might be less straightforward, as some problems of social coercion arise because of complex considerations of incentives and human psychology. Tonight, I want to consider the phenomenon of what Justin Tosi and I call exit blocking. Roughly speaking, someone engages in exit blocking when she imposes a social cost on another person for changing her mind. Now, I'll explain this phenomenon and consider some likely motivations that drive people to behave this way. I then want to argue that exit blocking is both a moral and epistemic problem. Finally, I discuss some norms against exit blocking that a society might adopt to discourage it and therefore enhance the freedom of its members. What is exit blocking? In a society characterized by ideal liberal freedom, people would be free to form their beliefs solely on the basis of epistemic considerations, not because of social pressure. The same would be true of deciding whether to speak their minds in public. Our own society, as I've also already hinted, does not live up to this ideal. One of the reasons it falls short is that some people apply social pressure in ways that discourage others from changing their minds about moral and political matters. Or at least some people apply social pressure in ways that discourage people from talking in public about changing their minds. In other words, some people block the exit and thus make others less free to form their beliefs solely on the basis of reasons and evidence. Now, of course, not everything you do to influence another's beliefs or public statements will count as exit blocking. Disappointed to see that someone you thought of as a fellow progressive has changed her mind about an important issue, say minimum wage laws, immigration. You might present her with objections or counter-arguments, or you might show her social science evidence, the causal claims her reasoning relies on are implausible. Your interventions might sway her to revising or abandoning her new position. She might even regard your second guessing as tiresome or annoying. In any case, that kind of behavior exerts influence of a permissible kind because it consists solely of epistemic pressure. Even if a person doesn't want to confront possible flaws in their beliefs, pointing them out doesn't impose the kind of cost that I'm concerned with. When a person blocks the exits, he does so by imposing a social cost on another person for changing her mind. And by social cost, loosely speaking, I mean some social result of changing your mind that you might dread. Paradigmatic examples include humiliation in front of your community. Someone might call you a bigot, or a racist, or a fascist, or a commie. You might lose relationships. In the most extreme case, it can result in being ostracized from your friends and family. A social cost is, in other words, a negative impact on your social world, your reputation, your relationships, your association, so on. Now, not all instances of exit blocking are highly costly for the target. Publicly issuing personal insults can be a form of exit blocking, for example. Although most people are not deeply bothered by such responses, it isn't pleasant to be on the receiving end of them. And so the threat of being insulted can deter even rational people from speaking up. My attention will mainly be devoted to forms of exit blocking that have these lower costs, because it's harder to see what's so troubling about them for their own sake. I think most of us can see what's troubling about trying to get someone fired or sending someone's email out, asking people to harass them and so on. It's because those things seem wrong in and of themselves. That seems bad. But what's wrong about applying social pressure in less costly ways when people change their minds? So I want to focus on these lesser costly social forms of exit blocking to focus on the broader dynamics that I'm concerned about. I'm also going to talk about exit blocking in public discourse on social media, cable news, the water cooler. Though you could, in principle, talk about exit blocking in, say, a private one-on-one conversation. Now, some sensitive souls might insist that being subjected to any public rebuttals of their claims should be treated alongside the cases I've just mentioned. And to be fair, it can be embarrassing. I know it can be embarrassing for someone to give an objection to your view that you can't answer. And not everyone enjoys arguing about ideas. So I agree that being called to defend your views is a kind of cost, but it's not the kind of cost I'm concerned with here. The kinds of social costs that I have in mind are the result of what Linda Radzik calls informal social punishment. Informal social punishment intentionally imposes a harm on someone for allegedly violating a norm. Examples of such informal social punishments include calling someone a fascist in front of their colleagues, emailing their boss to try to get them fired, posting their email online to incite harassment, and so on. Now, unlike formal social punishments, like getting disinvited from a conference, getting fired, getting banned from Twitter, informal punishments are not mediated by institutions or institutional procedures. It's like the Wild West. Exit blockers, therefore, try to impose a harm, understood in terms of a social cost, on those who change their minds about moral and political issues, which is thought to be by the exit blocker a violation of a norm. How dare you change your mind? However, as I pointed out, simply providing an objection or a rebuttal to someone who has changed their mind will not typically be a form of informal social punishment. Even if the person changing their mind has to bear some social cost, like being embarrassed, having her views challenged in public for others to see, it wouldn't be a form of punishment. At any rate, I hope the idea of exit blocking is clear enough. Now, people block the exits for many different kinds of reasons, and their behavior takes diverse forms. There's no single motivation behind exit blocking, and there's no single kind of exit blocking behavior. We'll talk about some examples in a moment. But a helpful starting point for mapping the conceptual terrain of exit blocking is to consider the group dynamics of this phenomenon. Now, here's one simple way of thinking about the group dynamics of exit blocking. This is going to be pretty crude, but it'll allow us to get started. Upon publicly changing your mind about immigration, minimum wage, you can be challenged either by members of your in-group, people who more or less agree with you about political matters, or you can be challenged by your out-group, people who more or less disagree with you about moral and political matters. So now we can think about two different kinds of exit blocking, depending on where it comes from, who's the target. So in-group exit blocking happens when members of your in-group impose a social cost on you for changing your mind. These are your people. These are your people who are imposing a cost on you for changing your mind. Out-group exit blocking, on the other hand, happens, as you might imagine, when your out-group imposes social costs on you for changing your mind. So these are people who had disagreed with you, maybe about most issues, and yet you come to change your mind perhaps about one singular issue, and you come to agree with your out-group about at least one thing. Now, you might find it puzzling why the out-group would punish you for changing your mind to come to agree with them, but I'll try to give you some examples here. The basic point is that the exits can be blocked from both the inside and the outside. Your in-group can impose a cost, and the out-group can impose a cost. Now, in-groups and out-groups will typically have different incentives to challenge the reported changes of mind. And their exit blocking behavior will often look different. Yet both in-group and out-group exit blocking comes to the same thing: discouraging other people from changing their minds. Now, from one standpoint, it might seem like members of an out-group should regard it as a welcomed event when someone changes their mind and comes to agree with them. But sometimes out-group members do not meet such conversions with approval. Instead, they attack these newly like-minded members and so block their exit. In such cases, out-group members will say things like, "This change of heart is too little, too late." Or they'll say things like, criticizing the convert's timing or the slow pace he took to arrive at the right view, saying, "If you couldn't see that this is a deadly disease until now, you're an idiot, and you should really sit this one out." Or, "Where were you 4 years ago when we could have actually used your help to keep a fascist out of the White House? Sorry, not buying it." Also common are baseless accusations that newcomers to the cause are changing their minds now only because it's convenient to do so, or because they finally want to be on the right side of history. Sometimes people will mock in advance those who might be tempted to change their minds, predicting that history's losers will come crawling to the enlightened group once they realize their children despise them. And we should never let them forget their mistake. These are all ways that out-groups can block the exits from the outside. The message seems to be, you may have changed your mind and come around to the truth, but there's still something very wrong about it, and everyone should know it. In contrast, in-group members, as I have said, block the exits from the inside, imposing social costs on apostates who publicly disavow their previously shared beliefs. Now, one common approach here is to use the target's other beliefs to accuse them of being inconsistent, or more to the point, of standing on nothing, on principle. Someone blocking an exit from the inside might say, "How could you now think this election was legitimate when you've been railing against these cheaters for years, like the rest of us?" We can easily imagine someone saying this as a request for clarification or to reconcile two beliefs that are apparently in tension. But the goal of the exit blocker in cases like this is to attack the moral purity or integrity of the apostate. She thinks the person has betrayed the cause and wants to plant the idea in others' heads that the person is insincere or hasn't really thought the matter through because he is corrupt or not even trying to get it right. When it comes to exit blocking from the inside, the message seems to be, "How dare you change your mind? I thought you were one of us. You will pay for your betrayal." As I've said, exit blocking can take many forms. In-group and out-group members can say similar things to block the exits. And they can even literally make the same statements or ask the same question. Even so, exit blocking statements by the in-group and out-group are distinguished by the position they put the target in relative to the group. The in-group accuses the target of never truly believing the thing in the first place or of being corrupted. The out-group insists he doesn't truly believe now or has changed his beliefs for the wrong reasons. both faces of exit blocking are often reducible to purity tests. What they have in common, even more fundamentally, is the imposition of a cost on the target and a deterrent effect on those who might follow suit. Why does anyone do this? Why would anyone be motivated to block an exit? Now, some cases of exit blocking can probably be attributed to straightforward malice. Some exit blockers probably do just want to harm others and see a fortuitous opportunity to do so. But I think there are additional explanations for the phenomenon. Here's one. When a person changes his mind about some issue of interest to a group, it creates an opportunity for members of that in-group and its related out-groups either to seek more status or to project and solidify their social status to the group. I'll say what more I mean by that, but I want to take a brief detour and talk about social status. Psychologists talk about two different ways of attaining or securing social status. One of them they call prestige. So prestige status is the status you get from having knowledge or wealth or access to resources, intelligence, world-class tennis players, comedians. These are people with high prestige status. Prestige status is conferred onto a person because of her admirable qualities, skills, or achievements, or at least what's perceived to be their admirable qualities, skills, or achievements. But there's a second way to get social status, and that's what psychologists call dominance status. Whereas prestige strivers try to lift themselves up and try to gain status. People who strive for dominant status try to push other people down. So, like our ancestors thousands of years ago, the way to ascertain prestige status was like you were the person who knew how to kill the boar. Okay, you knew how to find the water. Dominant status, you were just simply bigger and stronger than your enemy. You can exercise dominant status now by yelling at someone in a meeting, calling them a name online. Dominant status is earned by being seen as someone with control over the things people care about, or by intimidating or threatening. As you can probably tell, dominant status is more morally suspect than prestige striving status. People who seek prestige lift themselves up. People who seek dominance seek to push others down. Well, I suspect that a lot of exit blocking is a form of something that Justin Tosi and I call moral grandstanding. So moral grandstanding is just the use of public discourse or moral talk to seek social status or to self-promote. So I could say something about immigration or vaccines, and my primary motivation for doing so is that others think well of me. Others think highly of me, either because I have prestige status, look at me, I'm great, or look how horrible you are, pushing you down, seeking dominance status. So when people grandstand, they use public moral discourse to seek social status instead of seeking truth or understanding or knowledge or compromise. They're in it to promote themselves and their brand. How does this connect with exit blocking? Well, grandstanding members of the targets, the exiter, members of her target's in-group might see her apostasy as an opportunity for making a morally flattering contrast with themselves. They capitalize on this opportunity by seeking prestige status. Whereas the exiter doubts or rejects the correct moral views, we have much purer beliefs. She is abandoning the right side of history while I remain firmly on it as always. Grandstanding out-group members, on the other hand, might see recent converts as a threat to their status. Why should this person be praised for finally waking up when we have been right all along? The correct views have always been obvious to us, and this dunce has only just now figured it out. Or she may have gotten this one right, but she's still wrong about everything else, so we can't trust her. So grandstanders from both groups, the in-group and the out-group, see that their moral qualities can be favorably compared to people who have recently changed their minds. And so they do so in order to maintain prestige. But those who change their beliefs are also right targets for grandstanding to seek dominant status. When you change your mind publicly, you weaken the incentive for those in your in-group to defend you or to be seen associating with you. Even if you convert entirely to the beliefs of what was previously your out-group, the members of that group might not trust you or value your association with them yet. Thus, by changing your mind, you present aggressive people with a chance to exercise their will to power. They can lash out at you and demonstrate their capacity for aggression without fear of reprisal from your tribe. Another way of understanding exit blocking is to see it as an expression of what psychologists call the black sheep effect. Any of you heard of this before, the black sheep effect in psychology? Yeah? So the black sheep effect is the phenomenon by which deviant or inconsistent or weak members of a group are evaluated more harshly than similar members of an outgroup. So in other words, the people who are inconsistently on your side, maybe they're kind of wishy-washy, not totally committed to the cause. Your group will tend to judge those people more harshly than weak or inconsistent or deviant members of the other side. Weak members of a group are less committed to the norms and beliefs of the group than the strong members. So weak members of your group are a threat to the group's cohesion, a threat to the group's identity. They are viewed as unreliable or untrustworthy. Those who announce that they have changed their mind about something important to their in-group are, in a sense, willingly becoming marginal members of their group. The stronger members downgrade their evaluation as a result. And they respond by announcing their disappointment. A useful extension of this paradigm is that it helps explain the appeal of exit blocking as a strategy for deterring further defection from the group. The individual apostate is the occasion for exit blocking. But others in the group, who may be teetering on the edge of changing their own minds, can see the response and recognize the incentive not to do so. Nobody wants to be the black sheep. Now, from what I have said so far, it should be clear that people typically don't enjoy being on the receiving end of exit blocking. But exit blocking isn't just a distasteful experience. It's a bad social practice for both moral and epistemic reasons. It makes us less free, and I also want to argue that it interferes with truth seeking. So exit blocking is morally bad because it interferes with freedom of expression. Many people are understandably reluctant to air their beliefs in public when they run counter to the orthodoxy within their community. I could probably raise a few hot button issues now, and those of you who defect from the sort of majority view on academic campuses, you might secretly defect, but I doubt many of you anyway, would willingly say so in this crowd. Maybe you would. Maybe you have more courage than I do. But many people are reluctant to do so. This reluctance will only be stronger when a community engages in exit blocking, as it raises the cost of changing your mind. People in such communities must worry not only about the silent judgment of the peers, but also about the public campaigns expressing that disapproval when they stray from the flock. Now, Mill understood that informal social pressure could interfere with our freedom just as state coercion does. In fact, tyranny by an informal collective, Mill says, is, quote, more formidable than many kinds of political oppression, since it leaves fewer means of escape, penetrating much more deeply into the details of life, enslaving the soul itself, end quote. Informal communities are not bound by the legal rules and procedures in the way the state is. Any group member can simply smear an apostate for being morally or politically impure because of her public comments. And it becomes a liability for anyone else in the group to be seen associating with that person. The community might not be able to imprison or put to death its apostates, but it can make their lives miserable in ways states cannot. It can deny them personal relationships, willing trade partners, or any of the other benefits of social life, just by discouraging others from associating with them, lest they suffer the same fate. Now, a prudent person would thus try to avoid the costs of social disapproval for changing their mind in matters that might draw these sorts of exit blocking responses. If she's not so cautious, the penalties could be severe. Members of her outgroup will be wary of her, since the exit blockers have marked her as impure, not to be trusted. Sorry, I should just say, members of her in-group will be wary of them, since the exit blockers have marked her as impure, not to be trusted. Out-group members will also see her as impure, since she has been suspiciously slow to come around to the right view. The result is that freedom is limited to picking a team quickly and restricting one's public statements to claims that cohere with the group's views. Mill argued that freedom of expression is practically inseparable from freedom of conscience. To limit expression is therefore to impinge upon the most intimate region of human liberty, what you think. If a society regards it as normal and acceptable behavior to impose social costs on those who change their minds, then it encourages its members either to maintain a private conscience that does not leak into the public square, or to extinguish their heterodox thoughts before they might lead to public apostasy. Many will find it too mentally taxing to maintain a private conscience. So they will instead bring their private mental life into line with the views acceptable with their group. Their freedom is thus limited. But we shouldn't restrict our evaluation of exit blocking to its moral cost. Exit blocking exerts a pernicious influence not just over what people say, but also what they believe. Exit blocking interferes with free inquiry aimed at truth. The incentives established by exit blocking motivate us to change the way we think about the topics our groups care deeply about. As a result, people are discouraged from changing their minds, even privately. Now, in a world of ideally free inquiry, the social cost of changing one's mind would be low. People would be able to consider arguments and evidence without being pressured to come to a particular conclusion. Thus, they would be free to believe for epistemic reasons alone. Exit blocking interferes with free inquiry, however. When social costs for changing one's mind are imposed, people are disincentivized to take opposing views seriously, seek out countervailing evidence, or even to find out what the opposition thinks. If you are already attached to some view, and your social or professional relationships would be damaged should you abandon that view, then you have strong incentives not to entertain doubts about it. Exit blocking is therefore an invitation to engage in motivated reasoning. Knowing that you will face some social cost for changing your mind, you might quite understandably look for ways to avoid doing so, even if only subconsciously. You might be more easily swayed by prima facie plausible, with fallacious arguments for your views, or by straw man characterizations of opposing views. It might be objected that our concern about people being worse at even private reasoning in the face of increased social costs is overblown. Surely we can still evaluate views on their merits when we are just thinking about them on our own, and not report our conclusions to others if we think they won't like what they hear. And it's true, of course, that most of us don't report our every thought publicly. And then among the thoughts that we are most likely to keep to ourselves are the ones that will draw social blowback. But my point is not that people can't reason privately and safely and become heterodox thinkers that way. Rather, it is that at the margins, fewer people will do so. It is unpleasant to live an intellectual double life, always worried that you will accidentally say something that doesn't fit with the web of socially acceptable beliefs. In addition, people don't want to think of themselves as cowardly. But if you develop a set of beliefs that you cannot reveal to others without paying a high social penalty, it is hard not to realize that you are afraid to stand up for what you believe. Instead of landing in such an unpalatable position, many people will find some way to retain socially acceptable beliefs and not just think about them. Exit blocking also influences our private beliefs by limiting the arguments and evidence that people hear in public discourse. Rishikesh Joshi has helpfully analyzed this dynamic as a collective action problem. Here's the basic idea. It's important that people be exposed to evidence they're not aware of, or else we will collectively suffer from significant blind spots. We can alleviate those blind spots by sharing our evidence. I have evidence, you have evidence. We might have very different forms of evidence, and thereby exposing people to considerations they would not have discovered on their own. But it's also risky for any individual to speak her mind and present evidence that might not please the crowd. If the risks of speaking one's mind are great enough, we might all quite rationally decide that it's not worth speaking up. When groups engage in exit blocking, they raise the risk and thus the cost of speaking your mind. Rational actors see that there's little to gain by expressing beliefs that their in-group might not approve of. Their own social network will label them traitors, and out-groups will refuse to offer them safe harbor. And worst of all, even if they did accept the cost of speaking out, their individual sacrifice would probably produce little overall benefit. The rational thing to do then is to hope that other people discover the same thoughts as you and are less risk averse about sharing. But the greater the risk, the fewer such people there will be. The result of this collective action problem is that people are left without the social resources that might help them reason their way out of false beliefs. And that might be good for social cohesion, but it's bad for free inquiry. Where exit blocking is prevalent, loyalty is valued more than truth tracking. Now, I've tried to describe the phenomenon of exit blocking, and I've tried to explain why exit blocking is bad for both moral and epistemic reasons. What I want to do now is present a vision of a society that doesn't suffer from the problem of exit blocking. I want to describe some potential norms that we could adopt to ensure greater overall freedom than we currently enjoy in our present society of exit blocking enthusiasts. And I want to follow Christina Bicchieri's use of the notion of social norm, where she claims that a social norm has two important features. It's a rule of behavior such that individuals prefer to conform to that rule on the condition that they believe that most people in the reference network conform to it, which she calls the empirical expectation. And they believe that most people in their reference network believe they ought to conform to it, which she calls a normative expectation. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this. The only point you got to sort of grasp here is that a norm is something like a rule, like a social rule, that people prefer to conform to when they believe other people will, and they believe that most people believe they ought to do it. That's it. Not much hangs on that, but just so you're clear on what kind of notion a social norm is. This is what I have. So what's a reference network? An individual's reference network is the group of people whose behavior and attitudes are relevant to them for social purposes. The people that you more or less interact with on some regular basis. Now, in the case of the norms that I want to discuss here in a moment, your reference network will likely include members of both your in-group and your out-group. The in-group is relevant because these are the people we rely on for our most important social relationships: friends, family, allies. And we want to remain in good standing by following their norms. Out-groups are relevant primarily out of consideration for reciprocity. If the out-group is not following the norms, other groups may feel less bound by them as well. Okay, so what kind of norms do I have in mind? I want to suggest some proposals. If I was king of the world, these would be my proposals for better social norms in public discourse. And the obvious one, and the title of this talk, is just don't block the exit. We should not criticize people or impose other social costs on them simply for changing their mind. Again, this does not mean we should refrain from criticizing their justification for doing so, but shaming people as traitors or apostates for not seeing the light sooner is a bad practice. A related and supporting norm is that we should not reward exit blocking behavior. The forms of likes or retweets or you're so brave. People respond to incentives. And if they gain lots of status for insulting insufficiently pure participants in public discourse, they are likely to do so. Anyone who pays even casual attention to social media will recognize that we are far from having an established norm along these lines. Current practices are quite the opposite. As people who are seen as black sheep to some political team are regularly pummeled for their impurity. There are also norms that could encourage the fruitful expression of changes in view. So we could, for example, praise people who express disagreement with much of the rest of their in-group about some issue or some event. Or better yet, we could adopt more widely the practice of some debating societies of holding in especially high esteem those who can provide clear and compelling explanations for why certain arguments moved them to change their mind. The idea behind these norms is that the independent-minded can serve as helpful models for others to re-examine their own beliefs, even if they don't end up changing their minds along with it. Okay. I want to conclude by raising two objections to everything I've just said. First, to this vision of a society of unblocked excess, it might be objected that there is such a thing as too much intellectual independence. And we should be mindful of excesses in this direction as well. The thought being we're all just a bunch of atomic individual sort of reasoners going around trying to gather evidence. That's not really how we reason about our moral and political views. And so we should be wary of going too far in the other direction. Independent thinking is something you can have too much of. Now, I agree there's something to this worry, but it arises mainly because people confuse being independent-minded with other less admirable traits. To some, the mark of an independent mind is that a person apparently has no firm beliefs, or is always game for a surprising take that bucks all conventional wisdom. You probably know about journalists or people in the public sphere who are always trying to surprise you with their hot takes. If we reward people for these traits, we can expect a profusion of shallow and poorly thought out contributions to public discourse. To be clear, that is not my ideal of a free thinker. Being determined to surprise people or to frustrate expectations is just one more way of letting other people determine the content of your beliefs. A free thinker worthy of the name follows the arguments wherever they lead, and only because they lead there. That's the ideal. Here's another objection. I have argued that exit blockers make a mistake. People shouldn't impose social costs on those who change their minds. But perhaps I have overstated the case. Communities and associations organized around shared goals, values, lifestyle are valuable. People find meaning and status and purpose in these social networks. And presumably because they are sources of value, they should be preserved. Now, one way to hold communities together is to impose some social costs for defection. People should feel the sting of turning their backs on the beliefs and values of their community. Indeed, this may be one resource that communities possess to prevent people from changing their beliefs for bad reasons. They're just following some moral fad. So exit blocking may also be a way to prevent people from changing their minds prematurely. Say, after coming across a single smart person arguing for the other side. Furthermore, there may be important accumulated but latent knowledge within the received tradition of some social group. An individual should be reluctant to turn their backs on their moral and epistemic community. Social pressure in the form of in-group exit blocking can be a justified and valuable way to preserve those communities. Or so the objection goes. Now, one reply to this objection is simply to deny that exit blocking is ever permissible or morally valuable. On this reply, people should not impose social costs for changing your mind, period, even for these apparently noble reasons. Only purely individualistic epistemic considerations are at issue. It's morally wrong to sanction people who defect or to try to deter others from defect. Well, that's one kind of response. A second, and to my mind, more plausible reply to this objection is to know that sometimes social pressure can be a permissible way to preserve a community, but that it matters how and why this pressure is applied and what costs are imposed. For example, if group members block the exits in order to preen and parade their alleged moral purity, this would not only be morally bad in its own right, as an instance of grandstanding, but also an epistemically unreliable way to preserve the latent knowledge in a moral community, privileging as it does status seeking over truth seeking. But if modest, appropriately motivated social costs could be imposed on defectors, there may be some countervailing moral value in preserving social cohesion and a tradition. The challenge then, and this is the challenge, would be to articulate the context in which such exit blocking is permissible and what equilibrium exists between the norms against exit blocking and those in its favor. That's a task I leave for you. All right. As people pursue ever more avenues for public discourse about morality and politics, more opportunities arise to have productive conversation. More opportunities also arise to abuse the public square for personal gain. Exit blockers, I've argued, illegitimately impose social costs on others simply for changing their minds, often because they want to show off their moral purity or to feel powerful as they dominate those who publicly admit that they have been wrong. This is a bad practice, and its collective effect is to create a less free, more cruel, epistemically stunted society.
All right. You can get started.
Yeah, very nice talk. I really enjoyed this. I just there were two things that came to mind. You know, where I feel like exit blocking is sort of reasonable. Yeah. And the first, I mean, what I was thinking about was Catholics on abortion, right? And now you may not think that that's an acceptable case of exit blocking, but you know, you could think of some cardinals saying, you know, supernatural does not exist. It's like, okay, you get out of here.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, these are belief communities who need to protect themselves, and your freedom consists in leaving the church. You know, that's when your freedom consists in, but not in just saying any old thing here, right? And then the other side, the other case, I think is very different. I mean, you know, I'm part of an extended family in which people stretch all over the political spectrum, and the way we get together is don't talk politics. There's harmony, and you know, we all love each other, right? But once we start talking politics, then we just go haywire.
Yeah.
You know, and I kind of feel like, you know, good sense dictates that you keep your mouth shut about certain things because we value the harmony more than being able to express our beliefs, you know. And so, you know, those two communities, I feel like, you know, a bit of exit blocking is good.
Yeah. Good. So, thank you. So I think you're right about the Catholics on abortion. So if the priest changes his mind, says, "Well, I don't believe that this is the real presence anymore. I don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead." Yeah, so that's a case where it looks like we should show you the door. But is that exit blocking?
Well, you're free to leave. You know, I mean, if I say that on campus, one of my woke friends, I say, if you're gonna say things like that, you can leave.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you would call that exit blocking. But maybe.
Yeah. So I would. So here's two ways you might react to that priest. Oh, we're sorry to hear that. You've changed your mind. You're a good faith reasoner. We wish you all the best. Then there's like, you spawn of Satan. How dare you blaspheme? And I think that's the sort of exit blocking that I think is inappropriate. But you're certainly right that I joke with my colleague Kevin Vallier, like, between exit and voice, he's voice, I'm exit. So it is a bit of an irony that I've written this paper. I'm in a bad institution. I'm like, okay, I'm the APA. Okay. So I think all that's to say, I have to think more about the fine-grained distinctions between when it's okay to block an exit and when it's not. Especially when these are cases in which there's an institution involved and you signed up to follow the rules, right? And one of the rules is you got to believe X. It's not clear that our other kinds of communities, like families or friendships, have those kinds of formal institutional structure. The other thing about, I totally agree about minimizing the political discussions. I wouldn't call that exit blocking. I just think there's a virtue in keeping your powder dry. You don't want to go around talking about politics all the time. And so there are appropriate places and venues. And I do agree with you that like Thanksgiving dinner with your extended family is not the place to like, did you see what she said, right? I have to think more about how that relates to that. Thank you very much.
I have 8 people in the queue,
Okay.
and flag me down if you need to be in the queue. You're next. Could you say your name?
Yeah, Devin. Thanks for this. It's great. I have a question about if there's like an attention condition on this phenomenon of exit blocking. So you said at the beginning that the idea was that you impose some sort of social sanction in response to someone changing their belief, so as to change their belief back, something like that, or to. Is that the thought that there's sort of an?
I don't think you'd have to try to get them to change their belief back.
Okay.
You might want to say good riddance.
Okay.
I never want to speak to you again. That could be something you're aiming at. But sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm thinking of the sort of case. I think this will apply in any case, but I don't know. Something just like sort of disengaging qualify. So like, say somebody in my in-group changes their mind on some important issue, and I decide to sort of just disengage and not really interact with them anymore. I'm not going out of my way to sort of like humiliate them or get them fired or anything like that. But you might think like, look, on a wide enough scale, if their whole community starts to disengage with them, this is a significant cost. But you also might think it can be pretty reasonable in cases. There are only so many counter arguments and bits of evidence I can get to if I want to shore up my beliefs and make sure that I'm being open-minded. And I might think like, look, this person has changed their mind, and I'm just not interested in dealing with this counter argument. I've got enough other things to think of. So what do you think of this sort of case in which there sort of seems to be reasonable widespread disengagement?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Devin. So it occurs to me there's 2 different kinds of ways to disengage. You might disengage from like the argument that we're having. And you might disengage from the relationship. Say, I don't want to be friends anymore. Having thought about it for 10 seconds, it seems to me like the first kind is pretty innocent. Like you don't have to discuss everything all the time. I'm one of these sort of limit the sphere of politics in our private social lives. Like politics makes us dumb and mean, and I think we should try to save civic friendships and spheres of our lives outside of politics. So it doesn't mean like if you and I used to argue about minimum wage, like I'm not going to ever convince you. Like, and I'm like, okay, let's not discuss that anymore. I wouldn't think that of that as exit blocking. It seems more plausible to think of exit blocking as like, oh, you changed your mind, we can be friends. Now, in some cases, that might be okay. I grant that. But I think in other cases, like you're like, oh, Warmke, I have a different view on like, carbon emission tax law. I'm like, oh, we can be friends. That seems irresponsible. But I have no idea how to demarcate that difference. Thank you.
Next, I have Daniel, and then you're next.
Great. Thank you very much. I had a worry about the kind of strategic implementation of the policy that you liked if you were king of the world. Right, so if you were king of the world, you could say, let's tone down the exit blocking. That's fair enough, at least in some cases. But isn't there a collective action problem that prevents this from being very easy to actually move towards? So suppose we have the reds and the blues, and the blues talk to each other and they say, we need to stop blocking these exits. And they all agree to stop blocking the exits. And then one blue who plays chess thinks about it and says, wait a minute, hold on. If we don't block the exits, and the reds block all the exits, then we're just going to hemorrhage everybody to the reds. And then, so they very savvily agree with this reasoning and decide to start blocking the exits. Meanwhile, the reds, we're actually having the same conversation. And it seems like there's a bit of a prisoner's dilemma here, to put it in PPE terms, or supply problem, to put it in terms of PPE gateway class, which you could take next year. So then, I just wanted to hear your thoughts about the strategic problems for trying to move towards a more liberal norm here.
If I had the answer, sorry, what's your name?
Daniel Munoz.
Daniel, if I hadn't answered that problem, I'd win the Nobel. Because what you're asking is the question. Like, how do you change norms? Now, some of you may have read Christina Vicchiari's stuff on norms in the wild and some of this stuff, and she articulates a path, a way of changing norms. So one step is that you have to change beliefs. So she's primarily concerned with public defecation in India. So this is a massive problem. And so one of the things you have to do is change people's beliefs, their factual beliefs about the world. And so when it comes to exit blocking, that's what I'm doing tonight, right? I'm trying to get people to see, or the other 8 people who will ever read this paper, like that you should not block exit. Okay. The second thing is to set a good example. You can set a good example in our own behavior of not blocking exit. And then there's this important part of sanctioning offenders, right? So we need some way of sanctioning people who violate the norm of public defecation, or in our case, blocking exits. And so she has some other sort of steps in there, but that's the basic idea. And so you're absolutely right. Like, I'm just like listing the way I want the world to be. And there is a lot of work to be done to figure out how to change norms. And lots of really smart people who will win Nobel Prizes are working.
Well, it's not too late.
It is. No, it definitely is.
All right, the queue keeps growing instead of shrinking. I have you next, and then Eric.
Hi.
Hi, Logan.
Thanks. This is really fun. I'm working. The term is very nice because I'm kind of working on a paper that argues that sometimes exit blocking is justified, so it's very relevant to me. So you're just mentioning that sanctioning offenders is part of sort of enforcing normative expectations and sort of changing things. It seems to me that sometimes exit blocking sort of is a form of sanctioning offenders, so I'm not thinking in particular of a moral community, but I'm thinking in terms of a particular, really morally objectionable view. So if someone comes to me and says, hey, I'm seriously considering becoming a white supremacist, or I'm really open to the idea that maybe white people are just smarter than everyone else. I see it as I almost feel as though, actually, I feel strongly that I have a sort of moral obligation to block the exits and to be like, no. but it's not because they're considering changing their mind, it's because of the content of their belief. So would that explain why that might be justified in that case? Is because it's, in particular cases, it's like the exit blocking has to be specifically about not wanting them to change their mind?
Yeah, thanks, Luca. That's excellent. It seems to me that when exit blocking strikes me anyway as plausible are the cases that you imagine. Like when the belief taken up would be extremely noxious or harmful to other people. Okay. Right. So that's when it strikes me as most plausible. The problem is, well, maybe you don't think it's a problem. The liberal project, it's really hard to figure out what those beliefs are. I mean, there are some beliefs that might be extremely noxious and have horrible consequences that we all mostly believe in, and vice versa. So I'm just going to punt to the liberal tradition. I mean, this is like one of the what can you say? What can you believe? And this is Mill's worry, like when you have the social tyranny of people who impose their views on others, unless you just let people sort of like act on their beliefs, as long as they're not hurting other people, as long as you let people, have their beliefs, live out their lives, mind their own business, we shouldn't be picking and choosing which beliefs we impose these serious things. Now, I'm not defending that. I'm just saying, like, if you think the liberal project is worth saving or worth developing, that is the challenge.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. I mean, this nicely follows on Logan's question. I mean, I guess one thing you could say in response to what you just said is the liberal project is too overly ambitious, and like any other argument in value theory, you got to do some balancing. On the one hand, you have all the good things about freedom of speech and epistemic value of inquiry, but on the other hand, the cost of people who go in for sexist, racist, homophobic beliefs are real, and like any good moral philosopher, we should do some balancing. So I just want to, I guess, focus on these hard cases about someone who changes their mind, for example, to certain sexist beliefs or racist beliefs. Wouldn't one argument to add to one of the final objections you consider, which is the value of social cohesion, wouldn't another value for engaging in the imposition of informal social cause be, in certain cases, the right way for me to express what I value is to engage in certain kind of imposition of social cause, right? So if I regard myself and my whole identity depends on, say, fighting poverty in the world, and I discover that one of my closest friends now turns into someone who thinks, it's their responsibility that they're poor now, it seems in order to be true to my own value, and you can substitute this to gender equality, racial equality, it seems in order for me to stay true to my value, I got to cut ties with this person, or at least I got to withdraw some kind of goodwill. So now we're talking about imposition of informal social cause in terms of interpersonal relations and how much goodwill I have to this person. And it seems to me if you just focus on that kind of social cause, it's perfectly fine because sort of friendship is a privilege. It's not nobody can demand that I be friends with them. And by cutting these kind of social ties, it seems perfectly legitimate, and also it seems to be required by what I'm committed to. But I'm just thinking what you're doing about these cases. I mean, no. I agree with you, like rude comments on Facebook, like that's
We have similar friends on Facebook.
Yeah. I deactivated mine just after reading your book. It felt more best.
After first declaring that you were stepping off.
Yeah, that's right. It's a long speech.
That's great. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
It's Eric.
Eric, that's a lot to really nice observations there. I don't have much to say except for on Mill's view, there is this sort of like utilitarian thought that if the way to get to the more happy, flourishing society is by allowing all this nasty stuff, right? That's how we ultimately get to the better society. That's an empirical question to which I don't have access. But thank you.
Sam and then Greg Matthews.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to pose like a really weird case that I think is exceptionally improves what you're talking about. So consider, for example, the social circles, prestige, and money that someone like Tim Keller could get by declaring that he was an atheist, or that Richard Dawkins could get by declaring that he was a Christian, right? So this seems like an exceptional case that, you know, just because that is true, I think it doesn't impugn what you're up to. I think it's the exception that kind of proves the rule. But it seems pretty clear that the reason that they would change their mind is the wrong kind of reason to change your mind, right? So why am I bringing this up? Well, the truth plays a big role for Mill. And so I'm wondering, like, in your explanation of when blocking the exits or encouraging more opportunities for people to change their minds, in other words, you wouldn't want to create a situation where people change their minds all the time for the wrong kinds of reasons. Like, what's the right kind of reason to change your mind, or to not change your mind? Because it seems like I could imagine a world in which people change their minds too much for the wrong kinds of reasons, or we happen to be in the other one where people don't change their mind for the wrong kinds of reasons. So just tell me more about the role of truth, or what's doing the work in the background.
Good. Thank you. By the way, Sam was one of my former grad students. That was an excellent question, right? Really well-trained philosopher. Anyway, yeah, so I don't have a lot to say there, Sam, except probably I don't envision an ideal society. I'm not even an ideal theorist. I don't know why I thought this way. But like, I don't envision a society in which people are willy-nilly blown by the breeze of arguments, or I think it's good to be steadfast. That is an intellectual virtue, is to persevere in your beliefs. But all I take myself to be doing is to pointing to one obstacle to changing your beliefs that has a set of negative consequences. And I think removing that one obstacle doesn't mean there aren't other social ways of discouraging people from changing their minds. One of them I mentioned, which is like, okay, what's the argument? Give me your evidence. And so I'm sort of gripped by this like really childish, idealistic vision of like people driven by, you know, what they think is true, not what's going to avoid social punishment or gain status. Excellent question, Sam.
So we only have 6 minutes and 6 people, so I'm wondering if we could take some questions in pairs.
Yeah, I'll also stay after. So I'm not finishing the queue drives me nuts. So I'm disappointed in myself.
Well, maybe we can take a couple of questions, and then you can see if you can squirrel away just one of them. And so I'll give you the floor, and then so maybe both of you ask questions, and then.
I realized now that's what I wanted to ask about was something that 3 other people have already pointed out and have already essentially asked you about. Attempting to assert that there are no impermissible changes of opinion. Someone would declare that I have seen the light, and using my reason I have declared that the Jews deserve to die, or that I have declared that all BGSU professors should be shot on sight, starting with you.
Yeah.
Let's take a vote.
Okay. Unless I vote to abstain, but
Which way does it go?
I was just thinking Bowling Green professor. Yeah.
Let me take the other.
Thank you.
later.
Let me take the other question as well. And then.
Yeah, so thinking in terms of cost, do you think it would be helpful to introduce something like a normative baseline? So I had the same thought in Luke regarding the church, right? It's like, you know, it's a community of belief, and if the priest changes his mind, it is a cost, right, to leave that community and like leave that life. There's nothing wrong about that, right? No one's being wrongfully harmed, right? And so it seems like you might want to think about, I mean, a lot of the stuff is going to be costly, right? To leave a community, right? Or to like lose a friendship. But you might just want to have a distinction between, you know, have a baseline, right? So there's certain costs that are permissible to impose, right? And others that are wrong to impose. And where we want to worry about exit blocking is with those that are wrong to impose. Because the other type of case, I think, like Dr. its way to the church, but thinking about like, I'm sure I have deep beliefs about lines my friends cannot cross in their beliefs. And if they have those beliefs, then I'm out, right? I don't know what those all are. I haven't made it explicit to them. I just think that's totally fine. And I think it goes down to freedom of association and the fact that, I think as Eric put it, like some of these things are a privilege, right? And I can withdraw the privilege without wronging anybody.
Yeah, good. That's great. I do think that, and I may have minimized this in the talk too much, but I'm thinking of the social cost as not just any old cost, right? It has to be a cost that's the result of something like an informal social punishment. And you might think that withdrawing a friendship is not necessarily punishment, right? It could be like, think about think about these Scanlonian views of like normative norms governing relationships, and when someone like violates them, that gives you the sort of right to detach or to blame them or so on. And you can think of that, I think, ways that don't have to qualify as formal punishment. But you're absolutely right that I don't want to be left with the view that any intentionally imposed cost or foreseen imposition of a cost results in exit blocking of an inappropriate variety. That's going to be right. To the other question, yeah, I mean, do I think that every mind changing is good? No. Do I think that we should never impose costs on people who change their minds? Probably not. Yeah.
Exactly, there's a distinction then between that and exit blocking.
Sorry?
What exactly is the distinction between simply imposing some sort of imperative as to not change one's mind in such a manner and exit blocking?
Well, I could impose the cost without doing it as a kind of social punishment. So it's not just any cost, right? That's the withdrawing of a relationship. It has to be something like you're doing it to punish them. Whatever that ends up being.
All right, one more pair of questions, yours and Jeff's.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So if you could say more about what constitutes group membership. Sometimes it seems like you think that assent to competition or belief constitutes group membership, but other times it seems like more of a social phenomenon. I was thinking that might matter for how you distinguish leaving a group or entering a group.
Oh, I don't have, man, that's a tough question. I don't know what a group is. Yeah. I do think there are groups that are that there is one of their essential features is convergence on several sets of, say, beliefs. Sometimes it's social. I think whatever your political views are, you are probably in a group of people, many of whom are people you never met. People who vote like you do, right? People who protest like you do. You're in that group even if you've never met. So you're right to note that there is two kinds of groups going on. One more social, one more political and fantastic.
Please bear with us for a couple more questions then pizza. I have Jeff, you, and you.
I get that top two of them.
All right, then, sorry, was your hand not up? Sorry, okay, then your hand. Someone with a black mask in the front row.
Hi, yeah, thank you for coming and talking. I think I'm in line with other talks about where do we draw the line between, becoming a bystander or maybe complicit in their own views. But also, do you feel like this conversation maybe holds the person changing their mind not as accountable as it should be? Maybe we're focusing more on the person who is, maybe doing the grandstanding or, kind of blocking the exit. Do you think maybe in this conversation that we kind of fail to hold the person accountable for maybe some really problematic views?
Well, that may be, but I gotta say, not all changes in view go the bad direction, right? Some changes in view go the good direction, and the problem with having reciprocal norms of exit blocking is when people who have the bad views and they want to come over to the good view side, they are subjected to exit blocking too. You can't get exit blocking only on the on the good side. You protect the good views and the bad views that no one ever protects them. They're free to come over to the good side. So there is this like really difficult question of how do you if exit blocking is reciprocal, what do you do about that? I'm not asking you what you do about that. But it occurred to me that all the examples of exit blocking are like views that we think are bad. So then is our view like, well, exit block for the bad views, you don't exit block for the good views if you're the in group, but if you're the out group, then you can. Those are really complicated sets of norms for people to internalize and like reinforce, and you're probably going to not get reciprocity because you're not going to get both sides agreeing to let the other side, exit block from the inside, but not from the outside. Anyway, it's a cut question.
Thank you very much, and thank you.